Okay, cool. Well, I guess I'll get started, and then we'll just kind of see who trickles in from Heller students. So I feel like I know almost all of you on this intimate call we have right now, but I'm kind of wearing a couple different hats right now. Brian is unfortunately sick, so no Career Center folks right now, and this event was actually organized by the Boston Network for International Development. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, but they're a connector between internationally focused organizations, individuals, and universities in the greater Boston area, and host a lot of different events. A lot of you probably went to the networking event that was super popular like a month ago. And then they also do events like this. This is kind of a new format. Usually they do a panel, but this is intended to be super informal, calling it a fireside chat, but without the fire, I guess. So definitely supposed to be pretty casual, and feel free to like jump in and ask questions and just converse with us, especially given the size. So I am currently interning at Corporate Citizenship, which is where Sarah works. I actually got introduced to it through BNID because Sarah is on the BNID board, and I was really interested in getting into ESG consulting and have a background in international development. So I was really excited to see Sarah's background and her career path engaging with the private sector, and wanted to learn more about it, and have been doing an internship with them this semester and really enjoying it. So it's been a really great opportunity. And there are people with lots of different backgrounds at Corporate Citizenship. And yeah, Sarah can definitely tell you more about how she got into this space.
Excellent. Thanks, and welcome everyone, and to those who listen in later. Yeah, so as Laura mentioned, this is gonna be very informal. We also want to encourage questions. So if there's anything that comes up along the way, like let's just keep it like however, if anything pops into your mind, please just raise your hand and let's talk about it. I was going to light a fire. And I was like, that seems like a little complicated, but I do like the idea of a fireside chat. So let's all imagine ourselves around a fire and talking about ESG and corporate engagement. So for me, as Laura mentioned, I sit on the board of BNID, love the network, highly encourage all of you to stay engaged. It's a fantastic group of people, great community, with a lot of opportunities and learning opportunities and just networking capabilities. So highly encourage you all to check us out if you haven't already. And then for almost a year now, I've been at Corporate Citizenship, and what we were thinking about for the structure of this conversation is sort of what has been my pathway to corporate citizenship, and then I can give you a quick overview of corporate citizenship, what we do, the types of companies we engage with. But I'm actually an SID grad. I was at Heller. I graduated in 2006. So graduated in 2006. I don't think the MBA program, like there were the MBA students and then there were SID students. I feel like right shortly after I left, that became a thing of a joint degree, or that there was a more connections being made between SID and MBA students, which is fantastic. That's great. I'm so happy that you all have that. And it sounds like you're really organized and connected. And so I graduated in 2006, and then I went to Oxfam America. Many of you might know them, based in Boston, and I was at their Boston office for 15 years and did a number of things. I came in the door working on some distinct projects, like working on national campaigns for for constituent building. So did a little bit of that, and then spent around 3 years working on worker rights in the US. So looking at domestic worker rights issues, migrant labor, factory workers, undocumented immigrant workers. And so did a lot of that work of building out a decent work strategy, as we called it. And then our partners, there is private sector that comes into play. And then as I was doing a lot of that work, a lot of our farm worker union partners were using the corporate campaigning model I don't know if any of you know, like the United Farm Workers and the Great Boycott. So United Farm Workers is a longtime Oxfam partner. And so really looking at how to leverage, how to put pressure on companies, use that as leverage to get certain commitments out of companies. And so we were talking with our partners and they were wanting to launch new corporate campaigns. And it's like, okay, we do have this tiny little department called the Private Sector Department at Oxfam America. I think there was like maybe 3 people at the time. And it was like, we need to coordinate with them because there are US companies involved and we need to figure out, do we have a role to play in sort of gaining access or, kind of facilitating some kind of engagement. And so there was some work that we did there in terms of trying to figure out what's the role of an NGO and the partner and what kind of, there was definitely some leverage that we could lend. And then coming out of that, I realized the private sector department then became a big priority for Oxfam. And so they invested a ton of resources into building out that department. So it went from around 3 people or so to like 15. I don't even know where they're at now, but it's around 15 to 20 people now. And I came in after having worked in the US program. They were really looking at how can we kind of put our ears to the ground with our country teams. They were regional teams at the time, and really kind of understand what are the challenges that they're facing. Do they talk to private sector actors? Why don't they? Is there potential to collaborate? Back at the time, so I joined the private sector department in 2011. So I joined Oxfam 2006 and joined the private sector department in 2011. And some of you might be familiar with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which were endorsed in 2011. And so there was a lot of momentum and interest about what is civil society's role, kind of rights holders' voice in, this like, newly established, recognized framework for business to respect human rights. There were tons of questions and a lot of unknowns and a lot of hesitation, but that was also like a good platform to start talking to people. Like, we have this framework, there's these corporate campaigns that have really worked in different parts of the world. Like Oxfam had a Starbucks campaign where there was intellectual property rights for coffee growers in Ethiopia. So we had that example of like, if you have big companies that aren't listening or are infringing on your rights, or there are negative human rights impacts, what do you do? How do you talk to that company? And we were looking at ways that we could lend a voice and facilitate a conversation and dialogue and negotiation with local communities. So I did a lot of that work of just like trying to understand what, like wrap our heads around, what is the private sector? What does this mean to you? And in certain regions, there was a lot of hesitation, a lot of skepticism, and it still exists today, and for good reason. It's like, we don't talk to companies. That's not an interest of ours. And then in other parts of the world, it is definitely a tool and part of strategy. So it was definitely a great learning for me of trying to understand where people are coming from and the hesitation. And also, I think doing a lot of early reflection, and it's advanced a ton now, but thinking about kind of decolonizing aid and thinking, I think that a lot of the corporate campaigning was coming out of the North. And so it's like, kind of Northern companies trying to get commitments, and then the implications in the global South. A lot of really interesting and important work has come since then, but I think that that was also something that we were recognizing as part of this work, as we're, kind of thinking about US companies and what is the perception of US companies and kind of the domination in many different markets. So there was that as well at play. And then we, the UN Guiding Principles, that started like kind of gaining a little more momentum, a little more understanding. People were becoming more familiar with it across regions, and kind of having their own interpretation of what that looks like in their own geography, like in their own context. But then we said, okay, the UN Guiding Principles it's a framework. There's no endorsement, there's no it's not hard law. So how do you regulate? How do you hold companies accountable with just a framework? And so Oxfam started doing scorecarding, and maybe some of you are familiar with some of the like behind the brands scorecard, where the top 10 food and beverage companies were ranked according to different sustainability indicator themes. And so I was using that as a way to hold companies accountable, get them to commit, since there's no sort of legally binding framework that they have to adhere to. So we used a lot of scorecarding, corporate campaigning, and through that, like a sophisticated way of engaging with companies, of like, kind of going back and forth. And I see that has really progressed and advanced with other organizations doing it, like, having companies engage in dialogue, figure out where can they make progress, being, trying to open up about what's possible, what's possible in the future, what's possible now. So the scorecarding and corporate campaigning was really fascinating, and a way for us to really do some really direct engagement. But then as time went on, I realized that there was only so far that I could go in terms of talking to companies. There was, every time we were in the room, it was like, oh, Oxfam's here. Like, let's sort of, let's be careful about what we say. I remember one of my meetings with a company, it was like, I think there were maybe 4 lawyers in the room. And then one of the sustainability people is like, that's just the way it goes. It's Oxfam is an advocacy organization, and they're a needed stakeholder. But there was only so far that I could go in terms of my own engagement, and I wanted to dig deeper into some of the challenges that companies were facing. I wanted, kind of a look under the hood, have honest conversations, and so that's where I found myself thinking about what that transition would look like outside of Oxfam, and kind of using the context that I had and understanding from that space of an NGO and private sector engagement, what are the things that I could do coming out of that? What are my opportunities? I got to be honest, when I first came at it, when I was thinking about that transition, I was wondering, are companies, are they going to say, oh, Oxfam, and say, no, we're not even interested? But I was super surprised that it was like the international development background, the experience with rights, kind of directly engaging with rights holders. All of that has a ton of importance and meaning. And so it did not discourage anyone. And so I looked at management consulting and saw corporate citizenship, and saw there were some people with international development backgrounds who would come from that space into management consulting. And I was really drawn to corporate citizenship because it's more boutique. There's a real, there's more of an intimate, personal sort of connection that we have with one another. It doesn't feel like a massive organization. I also, coming from Oxfam, it was so big. I really wanted something that was a little bit smaller, that I could feel like I kind of knew more or less everyone who worked there. But corporate citizenship is part of SLR, which is a bigger environment and ESG consulting firm. But corporate citizenship there's still a lot of the things that kind of make us unique next to SLR, but that is our parent company. So I went over to CC, as we call it, and I joined just under a year ago, and started looking specifically. I was brought in to look specifically at human rights and the S of ESG, and really kind of helping to make that bridge with companies. And so now I'm doing some really interesting work with Laura. We're working on human rights saliency assessment, and I'm trying to build out the social impact service line. And it's been an incredible journey. And I will say, it's like having those NGO contacts, having kind of knowing the network of different stakeholders has been incredible. And it's a great asset. So I would say, like, use your networks and your community as you're thinking about, like, it'll serve you as in any role that you're in, for sure. And so I definitely look to them for advice, or just sort of like to ground truth things of like, now that I have a different hat on, does it make sense, or are there things that I'm missing? So that's always really important. So I definitely tap into my community that way, from international development. Yeah, I mean, I think I got what I wanted after that switch. After 15 years, I definitely was able to meet new challenges, expand my skill set. So it's not just the social part of ESG that I come in with. I mean, CC also offers different ways for us to engage. Like, Laura and I work on across different projects of ESG disclosure, from ratings and rankers. We're working on reporting for like ESG reporting for clients. We work on strategy development. So we work on a range of things, which is also really exciting. So I'll leave it at that. And Laura, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I know you're wearing multiple hats right now on this call, but if there's anything you wanted to add about CC in particular, and from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe we could open it up for questions, and feel free to, ask me or Sarah anything.
And is that Ashley Brown? If that's Ashley Brown, then you can also weigh in on CC. But I don't know if that's the same Ashley.
No, it's Ashley Robinson. I'm a first year.
Oh, okay.
Welcome, Ashley. Does anyone have any questions for us at this point? Feel free to shout them out or drop them in the chat.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
First, I want to say thank you for your presentation and for taking the time to speak with us. I guess my question is about learning more about ESG. I guess I want to ask, what would your recommendation be for someone who's going to be graduating and wants to learn more about ESG? Like, what resources can I use in order to, get up to date with jargon and things like that when I'm applying to ESG jobs? And then the second question is, I've heard that the CFA Institute gives a certificate in ESG, and I was wondering if that is worth investing in, or it's possible to get these roles without having that certificate. Thanks.
Yeah, great questions. Okay, how to start? I came into this with like I think there's a lot for civil society to get up to speed when it comes to ESG. I mean, this is like all the business talk. I got to be honest, we were talking, as we were thinking about it within the NGO sector, it was really about CSR, it was a little bit different. So definitely for me, it was a shift of like, how do we think about it? How do we talk about it with companies? There's definitely things to learn that you could quickly get up to speed around just sort of the ratings and rankings of looking at like DJSI, for example, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and kind of looking at what are they asking companies to disclose. And so that's something that's like really easy. You can you can explore that. You can see what's going on there, and also ISS, MSCI, some of those big ratings and rankings, GRI. I know I've got a ton of acronyms that I'm throwing at you, but it's just to get a sense of what are they asking companies, what are the expectations, and a lot of companies are paying tons of attention to their scores there, and how are they scored with respect to their competitors. So there's a lot of some companies don't care at all. I met with a company yesterday and she's like, I don't care about that. I'm like, and great. she's like, we're not even categorized correctly. So good for you. That's great. But a lot of companies do care about it. So I would check that out. I would look on LinkedIn. There are like some great kind of professional groups for ESG and sustainability, and a lot of people are posting information up there, free courses or paid courses, jobs. There are a couple that maybe we can throw in the chat. I can look them up, or we can follow up later. Maybe some that you're already aware of. I would also look at maybe if there are some companies that are kind of like brands that really inspire you, or you want to learn more. I would look at their ESG report. I would check out like, what are they talking about? That's all you can tell that they are pulling words from the expectations, like disclosure expectations, and they are putting them in there. And they usually will report on GRI and sort of how they're and SASB. So that you'll see in the back in the appendix, like what are they pointing to in terms of policies. So that is a great way to just like quickly get up to speed. And then if you're in an interview, you can talk about that, about ESG disclosures, what the expectations are. There's also some stuff on regulation. Like there's new, so I would just kind of keep up to speed on kind of what are companies having to pay attention to now around perhaps regulation. I know there's like some new SEC decision that was made. There's EU regulation coming out, it's going to be in like a couple of years, but just to like keep track of what the sustainability the disclosure expectations are. That's where I would start. What have you been doing, Laura?
Yeah, so I feel like this is very top of mind for me because definitely like I'm learning a lot of new stuff just on the job at corporate citizenship. And, you know, there's things I maybe wish I'd focused more on and things I'm really grateful I did focus on at Heller. So I took Michael Appel's triple bottom line class, and our final project was actually analyzing a sustainability report. And I feel like I am digging through sustainability reports all the time. So that was definitely really useful. As far as certifications, there's some people we work with that have them, but like I wouldn't say most people. I have talked to a couple people just like through networking about which ones are useful and like what the time commitment is. I think CFA is really high, and so is SASB. I've heard GRI is much more manageable, but I know there's still like a price tag to that, but it could be like a good thing to like add to your resume, and maybe we can like talk to Heller about that. And then in terms of skills, yeah, I think definitely understanding ratings and rankings. I am currently working on a disclosure project, and it's just such a huge like wealth of information and just figuring out, like I've done a lot of research in the past, but it's like very new research to dig through. So getting more familiar with the ratings and rankings will be really useful. And oftentimes it's like the appendix at the end of the sustainability reports. And then if you're interested, something that's really, really in demand right now is carbon accounting. So the people that we work with, that's like, there's maybe 2 or 3 people that have a background in carbon accounting, and they are very valuable and organizations are really, really looking for that skill. So definitely something to think about.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, and if you are good at Excel, which I think probably everyone on this call, except for me, you are already like 10 steps ahead. That's great.
Definitely a lot of Excel. Get to know your pivot tables and all that.
Yep.
Okay. Question in the chat. Hope that's okay if I read this out loud. So I know Bhavita, did you want to ask your question about B Corps?
Sure.
You brought that up first.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. So I'm actually very interested in the intersection of social good and good companies, and then like the relationship, whether internalized or externalized through some projects. So I'm sort of trying to understand the entire B Corp model. If it's something that did come out, as you've mentioned about the 2011 declaration, or is it like the way that businesses can run? So speaking of the certifications for businesses, I just want to pick your mind on, given that both ESG requires some amount of external auditing, some amount of internal calculations and course correction, and also certifications like B Corp or the ISO or the FSSAI to some extent certifies companies' good practices. Do you think that a company is just getting mind boggled by all of these checks that they have to pass through before they balance out their outcomes? Or do you think there is a probability for ESG and the rest of the certifications to consolidate and become one final sort of audit?
Ooh, great question. We didn't, I haven't done a ton with B Corp, and I know that there's, like any certification, there's going to be pros and cons. There's going to be people who are like on like the far activist side saying this isn't enough, it's diluted, and then the others are saying, well, just like let's just get something, like let's try this out, we can update it. It's going to be imperfect, but I think so I guess with that said, that we don't do, we've talked about it, I think we do a tiny bit, not me personally, but there is a little bit of work to support companies on becoming B Corp certified. So there is some work there, but I do know that there is, skepticism about like anything. So it's really like, well, what's going to be the return on investment? I think it's interesting. I think it's exciting. I think it shows that it's, if there's something like, what are companies doing to try and kind of make that internal commitment, embed it, demonstrate externally what progress they're making, what commitments they've made. I think all of that's good. And some people will say like, well, what is it, rainforest certified? Why can't I think of like the frog certification? I know a lot of great people who work there, but then like that up against like Fair Trade International, like there are going to be people who say, well, Rainforest Alliance isn't doing exactly everything that they need to be doing, like a Fair Trade International. But I think it's about we've had many debates, and definitely within Oxfam, about what does Oxfam kind of put their weight behind, and that's a very interesting debate. But I think just to say nothing's going to be perfect, I think it's about kind of where's the company at, where can they get buy-in. I don't think that, and I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding your question, but like I personally don't see sort of a coming together. I don't know if that's what you meant, of like a like a universal sort of, this is what you need to do. I that would be really amazing. I think there's just too much. Yeah, there's just like some there's sort of very distinct initiatives, and some of them talk to each other. And when that happens, it's fantastic. But I think that we're definitely not there yet. And I think there's just going to continue to be this space where you have different certifications for different purposes. But I think when I've seen it being extremely effective is when there is a clear, transparent process to gather stakeholder information and input. And when that happens, then it's just sort of like, if you don't agree, like if you had an opportunity to comment, you had an opportunity to provide your input, and let's just keep moving forward and trying to make it better each time. So that's what those are some quick reflections.
I resonate too. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Great question. Another question in the chat is, let's see, ESG is becoming a more common understanding even in traditional business entities, but we still have a far way to go of industry adoption of social impact. Where do you think ESG will go in the next 5 to 10 years related to measurements, public support, et cetera? So Sarah, with your crystal ball, what do you think the next 5 to 10 years look like?
Oh my goodness. I think like we were just talking about, Laura, I think earlier, really looking at just transition, climate justice, whatever you want to talk, however you want to call it, like the E and the S, like you'll constantly see this, like the missing S, or like the like what, like people somehow get like it's just like, sometimes it just feels so complicated for a lot of, like, what do we do? Like, we know what to do about business. Like we can set our GHG targets. We can be like, we're going to do this. We can report on that. That's like very quantitative. Like we can report on that. But then when it comes to people, it becomes just like extremely complex. But it doesn't like, I want to argue that it doesn't need to be, and we need to figure out a way to look at how to bring together the E and the S to really look at the impacts of the climate on people within supply chain, like within a company's operation and within supply chains, from like tier 1 down, all of that. I think that there's going, and which has been, it is incredible, just this like real kind of like a complete reckoning of like, what is work supposed to look like, the future of work. How can we make work? How can we create jobs that are decent, that are dignified, that pay a fair wage? And so I'm excited about the momentum there, and I think that COVID has helped shine a light on some of the incredible challenges and disparities that people have faced. So I'm excited about that. I think that that's something like the future of work, and Yeah, I mean, there are definitely other things around sort of digital rights and what is that, like a company's obligation. Like I was, we're talking with a company about like they might not necessarily feel like a tech company, but they are because they're selling. It's just like you need to be thinking about your footprint, where your different businesses are, and kind of really thinking about kind of issue areas that you might not necessarily have thought of before. So I think like privacy and digital rights are going to be huge. And then I'm thinking maybe like regulation. I'm really hopeful that there'll be just like some hard law that we can really look to, because I think also companies are advocating for that too. Just like, can we put laws in place so that we don't have to make this stuff up or like kind of like reinvent the wheel. So if we can have some laws, that'll be a starting. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm really hopeful that within the next several years that there'll be mandatory human rights due diligence and other regulation coming out.
Yeah, I think that's also key. I mean, during Climate Week, I listened to a few sessions and a lot of people are talking about how difficult it is to measure Scope 3 emissions, and really anything that's happening in your supply chain, it just gets really, really complex. But that's where a lot of the impacts, the social and environmental impacts are happening. And so regulation is really key to kind of streamline that, and collaboration, so that people are able to gather information from different suppliers. One thing I'm like hopeful about that I've heard people talk about, different companies talk about, is engaging communities, because a lot of this measurement, and this is something that we talk about like a lot in international development too, that communities and the people that you care about impacting are actually like left out of these conversations, and even left out of the actual measurement process. And so being able to incorporate those voices into how you're measuring impact.
Yeah, that's great.
Oliver, do you have a question you want to add?
Yeah, sorry, the train might come soon. So sorry if there's a loud noise. It actually it's really related to where y'all were just talking about. So I spent and Sarah doesn't know this, I think Laura does. I just spent 5 years working as an immigrant rights advocate. And my focus was community-centered advocacy. And I'm a first year, so I just started this business school exploration a couple months ago. And I'm really, I guess, a couple curiosities. One that I think y'all were just discussing is, how do we get to a place that we can measure like the qualitative impact on directly impacted communities and pushing that in ESG? So like, for example, like if you have a farm worker advocacy organization, right, that has built a lot of human power, and like developed a robust campaign, but then they have a legislative loss, right? In my sphere, there was like legal and policy. It's just like, often it's just measured through like, did you win in the courtroom or did you win at the state house or not? And we're completely disregarding the vast amount of like human power that maybe in like 5 to 10 years will accomplish something like way greater than whatever could have occurred this year in the state house or capitol. And so one question is, what are your thoughts on being able to measure that kind of like power building? And then two, do y'all see, and I think y'all maybe discussed this, but like any world in which folks who do think about like ESG and stocks can be participating in like coalition calls, right, with those directly impacted voices, and seeing ESG measurements and measurers or practitioners as partners in the movement rather as like afterthought voices.
Yeah, it's a really important point. I'm trying to think of like ways to like, to demonstrate that power. I mean, I think it's about, what I've seen it be effective is where you have maybe like larger organizations really being attuned to bringing in those voices that are sometimes kind of not really thought of, like smaller groups. I mean, that's definitely, thinking about how to raise their voices and give them a platform. So I've definitely seen it happen. I think it's also about, so looking at a building coalition, and that will build strength, definitely kind of, that I've seen that be most effective, kind of where in terms of like worker voice. I mean, to be honest, there's like, when I think about worker power and like the labor union movement, when I've seen it, and again, like Oliver, you have like some really like recent experience. My experience is dated now. But when I saw it was most effective is when kind of like everyone was like, okay, let's put our agendas aside. Let's think about what can we do together. you know, with like a larger union compared to a smaller union. And actually, there was one thing that came out of that was the Equitable Food Initiative that Oxfam incubated. That would be, you know, you can look at, you can find worker certified, like it's like worker voice certification on fruits and vegetables in the U.S. market. And so that's where you have labor unions, labor advocates, migrant, you know, immigrant rights organizations as part of that. That's where I've seen it be really effective, but don't lose that power, because as you said, it's like, just because you don't have a victory in the courtroom, that's like, it's incredible momentum. So I think it's about, you know, are there ways to maybe engage with business to get that on their radar, in coalition, or maybe just directly if there's an opportunity there, perhaps at the local level. I think it's about like, how do we build that into our engagement approaches, like when we're talking with companies about, here's who you need to be talking to, or these are, you know, these are like the local organizations that are really worthwhile to engage with. That's what we also need to be doing, you know, an even better job of just like really being able to identify who are those important voices, so we make sure they're not lost. But yeah, I think there are other ways, but it's just yeah, those are the ones that immediately come to mind. There was another question that you had, Oliver, right? What was it?
Sorry, yeah, no, it's fine. I think you touched on it. So it was like, and sorry, the train is very loud, but the other one was more of, so it was like two, it was like the qualitative measurement aspect, and then the direct integration into coalition spaces. So they could be like direct partners rather than, you know, someone you go to afterward for a memo on this discrete topic, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess my points, like, yeah, definitely they feed into that question. But I was also thinking, like, you know, it's like, it's our responsibility to like constantly remember that we need to bring those voices in, like, you know, even in like well-intentioned spaces where it's like, you need to bring the farmer voice in, you need to bring the worker voice in. They just have to be like carefully, like, it just needs to be meaningful. I've seen it work really well. It's like where we filed a shareholder proposal at Amazon back when I was at Oxfam, and being like, we're going to take a step back. Like, we're not going to be the leading voice. We're going to ask the worker union to identify a worker to speak on this, you know, to present the proposal. And that was really powerful. But that doesn't always work that way. I mean, you know, does the worker feel comfortable? Do they feel like that, you know, making sure that they feel like they're part of the process, that all of those things that you all are thinking about. But like, I've seen it work really well. And then but it takes time. It takes time to build that trust and to make sure that those voices are heard, and that they are driving the process too. And that where you have to like you have to give up ownership and power. And that's, you know, not everyone is ready to do that, but I think where you can see it happening, it's like, let's take advantage of that. Like, yeah, it's possible, but it needs to, yeah, I think a lot of the organizations that are part of BNID have that perspective and have that approach, and we continue to talk about that as a network. And so that's continued, like, well, it's a work in progress, but I've seen it happen, and it's critical. We don't have it figured out yet, but I hear your point, and we're going to constantly bring that into our stakeholder engagement process for sure.
Yeah, I think another thing that I've heard about is using tech, like incorporating tech into engaging stakeholders. I forget if it was Mars or Pepsi, but they were speaking on a panel about how they're incorporating like engagement, like maybe even through like mobile phones, to engage people throughout their supply chain. Bhavita, do you have a question as well?
Yes, and I'm feeling bad about asking this question because it does have like a negative tone to it, but given given that a lot of CEOs are receding on some of the ESG goals due to recession that's upcoming, in corporate citizenship or through your wisdom, how do you think that companies can, or the corporate can actually take advantage of furthering their ESG goals during this time, or do you have another opinion about this?
I don't think that they can use this as a pause button, and I don't think that the public or other stakeholders will allow that. And also, we've definitely seen within companies that there is momentum and excitement, and like this is, let's not lose that momentum. Let's get some really strong goals in place and an implementation plan. So I mean, obviously some companies are going to have to, rethink where they're investing their resources and their time. But what we saw in 2020, before I joined corporate citizenship, but then what we've been told is that team went through incredible growth, and it was right before Laura and I joined, but they went through incredible growth during a pandemic when things were shut down, when budgets were being cut, or there was a lot of worry about what is this going to look like, and what's going to happen to the ESG space and like sustainability. Is it just going to get put on hold, or are things going to be, again, is there going to be a pause button? And what they saw is that in fact it was the opposite. So it's not to say that we are going to be in constant growth, but it's interesting that what is the public perception? I think that in sort of and then coupled with like regulation and expectations, I think that this is not going to slow down, but we do need to be keeping an eye on it and making sure that we're doing our part to like constantly kind of push where we can, encourage them to do more, connect them to people who can give them that perspective as well. So it's not just from a management consulting perspective, but also to really hear directly from stakeholders what's important and why. But yes, I mean, it is something that we need to be realistic about. And so that's just, we'll just have to constantly be rechecking and making sure that we're pushing where we can. Laura, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I'm actually not not sure about like what the trends are looking like in terms of like if people are reneging on those commitments, or if budgets are being cut. It'll be interesting to kind of see how it shakes out. And like maybe this is overly optimistic, but it can also be maybe time that people can focus on ESG commitments or see ESG as a competitive advantage. Because it is really critical, especially for long-term success, which I'm sure we're all on board with.
Yeah, no, and it reminded me of one other thing that we as we've been looking at trends and sort of like the current landscape. I mean, talent attraction and retention, more and more more and more employees or potential employees are really looking at, kind of how to match their values with the companies and making sure that a company is really walking the talk. So I see that as a really important part of making sure that you're sticking to your ESG commitments, and that definitely your employees are paying attention, and they can go elsewhere if they don't feel like you're living up to your values.
I see that there's also a question from Ashley in the chat. Any voices you all want to amplify in the ESG space? Who do you listen to and watch for insights, podcast, news columns, etc.? I do want to put in a quick plug. On Monday, we have an ESG and Impact Investing Club finale, and we're going to have some really big voices in the ESG and impact investing space, and some really diverse a diverse panel and diverse perspective. So definitely chime in for that Monday evening. And Sarah, do you have any thought leadership that you like in this space?
That's a great question. I feel like I need more of it in my life. So I'm kind of looking to you all as well for inspiration. I mean, I think the voices that are missing, I mean, it's constantly like we need to be like, who's missing from this conversation? If we're thinking about like if we're looking at particular aspects of the business, who are we not thinking about? And a lot of the times, like the person on the inside will say, like, we need to be thinking about, LGBTQ rights. We need to be thinking about racial equity some more. We need to be thinking about health equity. So those are like, I think those are the important conversations about who's missing, why are they missing? Is there something that, what's the role that we can play to make sure that that happens? And also like look to other companies to compare and say, look at what some really interesting work and some really interesting commitments that this other company has made, and providing a really good rationale for why it's so critical to incorporate those voices. But yeah, it's going to be constant because voices are going to be missing, and we need to be pushing ourselves and making sure that we're really looking at stakeholder engagement with those lenses.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of just kind of basic, Green Biz has some great articles. I do a lot of LinkedIn, like following ESG and different ESG influencers. And there are a lot of people that are really pushing the envelope in interesting ways and challenging ESG in interesting ways. One of our panelists on Monday, Ken Pucker, is like the most outspoken person critically on ESG. But I think it's interesting and it's good to like kind of get that perspective too.
Yeah, I would say I guess the last thing is don't get too hung up on the acronym. Or feel like you need to know everything. Like, how do you dissect and explain ESG? I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think, when you're looking for jobs, it's sort of like, what are the tangible examples of the work that you've done, of the wins, of the accomplishments, of the learnings that have happened for you? It doesn't necessarily need to be 100% relevant or applicable, like in a business environment. I mean, definitely many of you come from different walks of life with different experience. And so that's all relevant. And so it's just, I think it's about also, this was good advice that was given to me as I was thinking about, like, how do I explain what I do? Like, we do so much. But how do I actually talk about it? How do I kind of put it into concrete terms? And that's also what I've learned with working with business partners really directly is like, tell me why this is meaningful to me. Why do I need to care? Sort of what's the value for me? But really kind of trying to, not that you need to answer those questions, but thinking about how do you sort of distill the impact that you've had, and all of you have had impact. All of you have been making, kind of making change happen in your communities, in the work that you're doing. So how do you boil that down and talk about it in really tangible ways? One piece of advice, which was really cool that I got, was kind of write out different stories of impact stories, and then pull out, have those ready and be like, I did this, I was able to do X, work with, this many people, had this type of impact. And again, you're all probably doing that a lot in your programs, but it was, that was really helpful. Just how do you distill it down to be able to talk about it in very succinct ways? Sometimes that's really hard, especially when you're talking about social impact. It's just there's so many factors that go into it, but the more you can kind of distill it down, the better it'll be.
Awesome. These are great questions. Does anyone, I think we have time for maybe one more. Okay.
All right.
Well, we'll still be around.
I guess I have a career question. For folks who are in our, young MBAs, we're about to enter the business world, right? And knowing our general interest areas, where are places that you think, what are the kinds of roles you think we should be looking at right now to have the kind of impact we do want to have, and not just sell our souls, and are there certain organizations that you want to highlight?
Oh my goodness, great questions. I think I think having a mix is really great. Even if it's just through your MBA program, you do a short internship somewhere to gain experience, to really understand kind of how does the business work, or how does that organization work? What are the challenges that they're facing? What's the culture like? I think it's about trying to get as much exposure to sort of those different environments as you can, to then kind of understand what's going to be important for you. What are those most important things for you? And kind of, what do you see yourself there for a while? Do you see this as sort of as a stepping stone? Not that you need to have, I personally don't think you need to have all of this figured out. Some of you do, which is fantastic, but but it also won't pan out that way, right? There are going to be twists and turns, and you'll be presented with new opportunities. You might go to a conference and hear someone speak and be like, oh my gosh, like this place looks amazing. As one example, but I would suggest trying to get a mix of experiences. And I think that'll also help you as you're going out into the job market after you graduate. Because I know a lot of the people that, that I've seen come into CC have some business experience, but then also have maybe some fieldwork experience, or work for an NGO, or work for, a socially responsible investment firm. Things like that, where you can bring in different perspectives. But I think it's about finding the right culture where you're going to feel like you're growing, that you can learn, that you can ask questions, and feel supported at any level within the company. But Laura, I think you also probably have some good advice. This is like what you're living right now.
Very, very top of mind, Oliver. And yeah, something I think about a lot. So we should definitely chat. But I think that consulting's been a cool experience because I get to exposure to like a lot of different industries. So it's, I'm working on healthcare projects, I'm working on, retail, food and beverage, and across a lot of different, environmental, human rights, ratings and rankings. And so it's a lot of different exposure, which I think is a great kind of entry point into this space. But yeah, you also kind of just have to think about where you're most passionate, and lots of other factors. So happy to chat more about that later. Well, this is awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone so much for participating. It was really great to have this conversation. I hope obviously you'll be in touch with me, but definitely, reach out to Sarah after this, and be in touch with BNID as well. There's lots of other awesome people like Sarah to connect with, and yeah, great networking opportunities. So
yeah, I'll just put my email in the chat. Okay. I think I got that right. Okay. Yeah, please reach out with any questions if anything else came to mind. And thank you, Laura, for moderating and and hosting. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for coming.
yeah, thanks everyone.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.